The third letter arrived on a Tuesday, smelling of damp earth and forgotten hallways. It was found tucked under the limp hand of a librarian named Eliza Gray, her body staged at the foot of the fiction stacks like a fallen protagonist. Detective Mara Thorne, her face a mask of professional exhaustion, brought the photocopy to Aiken. She didn't speak, just slid the single sheet of paper across the vast teak expanse of his desk. Akin's world was one of patterns. It was a clean, orderly world, walled off from the messy unpredictability of human emotion. His consulting fee was exorbitant precisely to keep that world at bay, to control the flow of interruptions. He preferred the company of data, which was logical, to people who were not. His external goal was straightforward: solve the puzzle. His internal need, one he would never articulate, was to prove that even chaos could be codified. His flaw was the very engine of his genius, a profound, almost clinical detachment. People were variables, not souls. He placed the photocopy next to the other two. The first, received by a retired dock worker before he was crushed by a falling shipping container, read, "The river forgets the names of the boats." The second, sent to a cafe owner before a gas leak suffocated her in her own basement, stated, "The bell once rung cannot be unrung." Eliza Gray's letter was more cryptic. "A book returned, its story unread." The police saw threats. Aiken saw syntax. He saw a mind speaking in a specific, curated dialect. For 3 days, his apartment became a silent war room. Maps of the city were pinned to the walls, not the modern digital kind, but yellowed paper relics from a half-century past. He cross-referenced the victims' addresses, professions, and social circles. Nothing. The connection was not in their presence, but in their pasts. The phrases themselves were the key. They were not random poetry. They were historical footnotes. "The river forgets the names of the boats." That was the title of a locally published obscure history of the city's defunct shipbuilding industry. The dock worker had been a young apprentice when those yards closed. "The bell once rung" was the motto of St. Agnes Church, which had torn down its bell towers 60 years ago. The cafe owner had been baptized there. A book returned. Eliza Gray had, according to a tiny human interest piece Aiken dug up, led a community campaign 30 years prior to save the old Carnegie Library from demolition. She had failed. The victims were connected not to each other, but to the city's lost landmarks, and the letters were their eulogies. The breakthrough came at 3:17 a.m., the city a tapestry of cold light below his window. Aiken laid transparent postal route maps from the 1960s over his victim location map. His finger, tracing the faded ink lines, stopped. Route 7. In 1964, a single postal carrier would have delivered mail to the dock worker's tenement, passed St. Agnes Church on his morning round, and dropped off books for the young, passionate Eliza Gray at the old library. He wasn't targeting people. He was retracing his old route, delivering one final, fatal piece of mail to the addresses that defined his legacy, the lives he had once touched and been utterly forgotten by. The antagonist was not a spree killer. He was an archivist of a different sort, a man screaming into the void, "I was here. I saw you." Akin called Detective Thorne, his voice calm. "His name is Leo Granger. He was a postman on Route 7 from 1962 to 1998. He lives at 1414 Willow Lane, apartment 4B. You need to go, now." "How can you be sure, Aiken?" Thorne's voice was crackly with static and skepticism. "The pattern is complete," Aiken said, his eyes on the map. "The next delivery is scheduled for the old sorting office on Elm Street. It's been converted into loft apartments. He's concluding his route." He heard the frustration in her sigh. "Without a specific victim, I can't get a warrant for his arrest. I can't even knock on his door without more. I need a name." A name. Akin looked at the cold, perfect logic laid out before him. It was elegant, solved, but it wasn't enough. The system required a human variable. For the first time, the pattern demanded he step into the messiness he so despised. His internal need, the need for connection he always denied, collided with his external goal. To finish the puzzle, he had to become a part of it. His detachment, his greatest asset, had become a liability. He had to feel the postman's motivation, not just compute it. He drove through the sleeping city, the neon signs bleeding color onto the wet asphalt. Willow Lane was a narrow street of crumbling brick buildings. Apartment 4B was at the top of 4 flights of stairs that smelled of cabbage and old wood. Akin stood before the door, not as a consultant, but as the next logical step in the sequence. He knocked. The man who opened the door was small, shrunken, as if the years had delivered him to his own doorstep piece by piece. He wore a pressed postal service shirt from another era. His eyes, milky with cataracts, held no malice, only a profound, weary recognition. "You're not from the root," Leo Granger said, his voice a dry rustle. "No," Akin said, "I'm here about the letters." Leo nodded slowly and stepped back, inviting him into a museum of his own life. The small apartment was immaculate. On the walls were framed maps of old postal routes, precisely annotated. Shelves held ledgers, each one a year of his service, every address, every name, recorded in a neat, unwavering hand. "They don't remember," Leo said, following Akin's gaze. "I carried their lives in my bag. Love letters, tax bills, birthday cards. I knew their secrets before they did. And now, nothing. I am a ghost." Akin understood. This was not about killing. It was about being seen. It was a terrible, violent curation of a life's work. "You're making a final delivery, proving your impact." "Proving I was ever there at all," Leo corrected gently. He picked up a sealed, cream-colored envelope from his table. On it was a name Akin hadn't yet deduced, the resident of the old sorting office lofts. The last stop on the route. The central conflict was no longer just Akin versus the killer. It was Akin versus the terrifying reflection of his own future. A brilliant mind, alone in a room with its patterns, screaming into a world that had stopped listening. Leo's flaw was a need for external recognition. Akin's was the belief he needed none at all. In that moment, the two men, hunter and prey, were mirrors. "It's over, Leo," Akin said, his voice softer than he intended. "The police are on their way. There will be no more deliveries." Leo looked at the envelope in his hand, then at Akin. A sad, peaceful smile touched his lips. "But there was. You're here. You saw the pattern. You understood." He placed the final letter back on the table, his work complete. He had finally gotten someone to read the mail. Detective Thorne found them there 5 minutes later, sitting in silence. The old postman who had forced the city to remember him, and the consultant who had just learned that a pattern has no meaning unless it connects to a human heart. Akin left the apartment, the damp night air feeling different on his skin. The city was no longer just a data set. It was a living, breathing entity, woven together by a million invisible threads of connection and memory. He had solved the puzzle and identified the killer, but the true resolution was the quiet, terrifying dismantling of his own isolation. He had earned this ending not through cold logic alone, but by finally, fearfully, stepping into the messy human current he had spent a lifetime avoiding. The story was resolved, and the protagonist was changed.